Hi guys, Rafter here. I hope that you're having an awesome 2021 as always. Welcome to the first episode of Rafter University, a series where I teach my viewers how to get better at Legends of Runeterra. In this series, I will discuss general concepts like basic and advanced fundamentals that you need in order to reach Master rank in Legends of Runeterra, and I will also dive into specific topics like how to counter a certain deck or how to use a certain deck correctly. For this lesson, I will teach you when not to use your resources in the game, so this can include cheap spells like Hush, Flash Freeze, or Single Combat, which are very easy to waste in the early to mid game because they cost so little. Medium to high cost spells like Withering Wail, Vengeance, or Ruination will also be covered in this lesson. And the topics that you will learn can be applied also to some units that you can consider as reactive resources like Ice Veil Archer or Arachnoid Sentry. Before we go to the specific gameplay examples, I'd just like to discuss first the thought process that you should be thinking when you're faced in a situation or spot where you can use a spell or a resource. The first question that you need to ask yourself in this spot is, do you need to do this now? Meaning, if you don't commit this certain resource, will you lose the game? If the answer is yes, then obviously you need to use that resources. A specific example for this is if Nasus is hitting your Nexus for like 12 damage and you have a freeze in hand, you will die if you don't use the freeze. Obviously, you use the freeze in that situation. But if the answer is no, and then you ask yourself a second question, which is this a key card that you should be saving for something else later on? Some examples of these resources that you should be saving for a specific card include Hush or Flash Freeze against Nasus or They Who Endure. Another example is Nautilus against Watcher. You would want to wait until they attack with Watcher before you use your Nautilus if you're playing deep, so that you can shuffle back sea monsters into your deck. Another example is Culling Strike that you're saving for a specific unit in your opponent's deck like a Thresh, an Ezreal, or a Heimerdinger. If the answer to that question is yes, then you don't commit that resource, you wait for the right opportunity to use it. If the answer is no, then you would want to ask yourself some more questions like, can your opponent respond? Will this card get more value later on if you use it later on in the game? And can you achieve the goal that you would get if you play the card without playing the card? That last part might be a bit confusing, but things will be more clear once we're done with the specific examples. Alright, the first game that we will look at is a game from one of my moderators on the Discord channel, Eidolon. So we will analyze his games here. For the first game, he is playing Shyvana Cithria Matron versus Nasus Thresh. We're going to go in a spot later where it's a decision point where we will ask ourselves whether to use a certain resource or not. Thinks about putting away Masked Mother, maybe because he wanted to keep the Masked Mother only with Dark Water Scourge, but ended up keeping the Masked Mother. I think I would have mulliganed away the Masked Mother because I didn't have Dark Water Scourge, but that's fine. It's not the end of the world. So first turn, he summons Dragon Chow, basic stuff. Nothing too fancy here, so his opponent will go for the First Keeper into Butcher. And now he has the Oblivious Islander to respond, to be a blocker for the Butcher. And he goes ahead and does that, so good job here. His opponent attacks, he blocks with the 3-2 into the 2-1, which is great for him. So on turn 4, his opponent open attacks, takes it, he summons Shyvana. Okay, so you now have a 4-5 Shyvana, so you're pretty happy here. He draws a single combat. So this is where the things will start to get spicy. So his opponent uses a Vile Feast proactively. If I was playing, I think the reason that he would do that is to save mana, and 2, to put my Shyvana at 4 HP range. Because at 4 HP range, Shyvana is very vulnerable to Black Spear. So I'm already thinking here, why is my opponent doing this proactively? If he somehow forces to kill the spider here, he most likely has a Black Spear, so I should save my Sharp Sight for that. And let's see what the opponent does. And there we go. His opponent uses Glimpse Beyond, so you should be thinking right now, the opponent has Black Spear. Here, we can see him hovering over single combat. So the first question that you should ask yourself, do you need to do this now? Do you need to single combat now? And the answer is no for several reasons. First reason is that by using single combat here, you're only preventing the draw. And in the early game, you don't really need to prevent the draw because your opponent still has 4 cards in hand and they're playing against Nasus Thresh. His deck draws a lot anyway, so preventing the true draws this early in the game is not super valuable. The situation where I would use single combat to prevent a Glimpse Beyond is if it's already in the late game and your opponent only has 1 or 2 cards left. At that point in the game, you already have a good idea of what he's holding and what he's not holding. So by using single combat at that point in the game, it's fine. You're preventing draw, you're preventing him to fix his hand in the late game. But this early, there's no reason to use single combat yet. You have no idea what's in your opponent's hand. Another question that you should be asking yourself is, can your opponent respond? What are the possible response of your opponent if you go for single combat? Well, first, not necessarily respond, but an action after is the Black Spear that we already were thinking about earlier. And the second is another Glimpse Beyond. If your opponent has another Glimpse Beyond, then he would still draw 2 cards and you would lose your single combat for no reason. So this is a very bad spot to use single combat with your opponent at 3 mana left and he's projecting a Black Spear. Another question that you should ask yourself is, should you use this card later in the game? And the answer is yes. Single combat is very valuable in the matchup against Thresh. Thresh is one of the few ways that they can win this matchup. If they are somehow able to level up Thresh, you need single combat in order to stop that from happening, because if they are able to level up Thresh, they can bring out a Nasus out of nowhere and you can just lose from there. So let's see what he does here. He eventually goes for the single combat here, which, as we discussed earlier, is the wrong move here. So he prevents the draw, and voila, the opponent goes for the Black Spear. In that situation, if your opponent is doing weird stuff, you need to ask yourself, why is he doing that? The Vile Feast into Glimpse Beyond was super forced, right? Because usually you would want to use those cards reactively instead of proactively. But then the opponent uses it so proactively, it means that he must be trying to set up something. So here, he will go for the Mask Mother into Dark Water Scourge, which is a fine play for me. And voila, his opponent actually puts out a Thresh. If he didn't use single combat earlier, he would have mana for single combat now. Or maybe he would even have Shyvana alive on board if he used Sharpsight to save it. But bottom line is, he had a single combat to answer this Thresh. Because this one of the only ways that you can lose against Thresh Nasus while playing Shyvana, Cithria, Matron is if they are able to level up Thresh. So he had no single combat, so if the Thresh is threatening to level up, he had no answer for that. And on top of that, his Shyvana died. So he goes for the attack here, which he's able to lifesteal. And he draws a Stalking Shadows, a very good draw for his side. He uses the Stalking Shadows, he draws a Cithria, another lucky draw, a very good draw for the Eidolon side. He develops a board, and then in the next turn, he just smashes down Matron, I think. Yeah. So he just smashes down Cithria into Spectral Matron into the Cithria, and at this point, the game is already over. But he was very lucky here that he was able to draw a Stalking Shadows, and the Stalking Shadows was able to draw into the Cithria of Matron. As you can see, the board is the opponent is actually developing a quite large board. He didn't have single combat to answer the Thresh. If he didn't draw those 2 cards specifically, Stalking Shadows and Cithria, he could have been in trouble here. But he drew them and he won the game. This is an example of winning a game but not necessarily doing the right place. And on the other spectrum, there are games that you lose even if you do the wrong place. So you shouldn't analyze on whether you won or you lost. You should analyze whether you made the correct place. Sometimes we tend to think that when we win games, we played perfectly. But that's not really right. Sometimes you're just lucky. Sometimes your opponent just misplayed. You should celebrate based on your place and not based on the result. If you're doing the right place, you should be happy about your wins or your losses. Okay? So let's look at another game here. The second game that he played is Ashe Leblanc Frostbite versus Dragons, which is a matchup that is very favored for Ashe Leblanc because Ashe Leblanc thrives against mid-range decks. So for the mulligan, he opts to mulligan away a Culling Strike, which is fine because he has one in hand. I like keeping Ashe in this matchup because the free freezes are huge for combats. Keeping one Culling Strike is also good because the opponent has Zoe, and Culling Strike could be a good answer for that. So for the first 2 turns, they just keep passing. There's no really good place here to make. His opponent goes for a Solari Priestess, which is a good opening for LeBlanc. In some situations, maybe you wouldn't want to Leblanc here because your opponent could threaten LOR and Protege. But because his opponent has no more unit mana, it's safe to summon a Leblanc here. And this is looking good for him. On turn 4, Ashe is looking hot here. Because if your opponent summons a unit, you can freeze it down, attack with both. And you still have Flash Freeze as a backup. So Ashe is a very safe summon here, very good for the Ashe deck. The opponent summons a Solari Shield Bearer, which is fine. You still go for the attack here. If your opponent responds with like a double sharp sight or a hush, if he hushes his own Shield Bearer, you have the Flash Freeze to answer. And it's also very risky for your opponent to do that because your opponent should be thinking about Troll Chant as well. So his opponent goes for the double block here. And that's fine. No problem here. Okay, so his opponent summons a goat. We go into the next turn. He draws a Culling Strike here. Okay, opponent summons a warrior that he invoked from Solari Priestess. And now, Icebear Archer would be super good into the challenger. In order to stop it from summoning the Ashe, you get a free body on board with Icefield Archer, and you stop your opponent's attack turn. Super good move there for Eidolon. I approve of this Iceveil Archer usage. So here, his opponent attacks, and this is where he starts to use resources unnecessarily. So this is the spot where he's looking at his hand, assessing his options. So he's asking himself, should I use Flash Freeze? Should I use Culling Strike? Should I just block against the Iceveil Archer and the Goat? And I think what he does here is he goes for the Flash Freeze, which is a wrong decision in my opinion. If you're not sure what to do, so let's go through the questions. So first question, do I need to do it now? Do I need to Flash Freeze now? And the answer is no. What would you do by using the Flash Freeze? You kill the Solari Shield Bearer, which is not super high value because Solari Shield Bearer is just a 2-drop. Flash Freeze is 3-drop. You can just sacrifice 3 health from your Nexus if you let this through. The HP of the Nexus doesn't matter, so that's already the answer there. So, the answer to the first question, should I do this now? No, okay? The next question, should I be saving this resource for a specific card in the matchup? Freeze would be better to use on a challenger where your opponent is actually threatening to kill your units, but by doing this, if he uses Flash Freeze here and trades with the Leblanc, he is putting the Leblanc on danger. Another question that you should ask yourself is, how can your opponent respond? So for 3 mana, your opponent only has 2 responses here. First, it's a Sharp Sight, which is enough to kill Leblanc because Leblanc only has 2 HP. Second is Hush. Your opponent can hush down his own Solari Priestess, Solari Shield Bearer in order to remove the freeze. So, if you use Flash Freeze here, you bring the Shield Bearer's HP down to 0. Your opponent responds with either a Sharp Sight or a Hush, you would be forced to use another combat trick like another Flash Freeze. So that's exactly what ends up happening. He uses the Flash Freeze here. So he uses the Flash Freeze and his opponent was able to respond with the Hush, forcing him to use another Flash Freeze. So what happens here? He spent 2 Flash Freezes in order to kill a Solari Shield Bearer, which is super not worth it. What I would do there, what I would do here if I was the player, I would just trade the 2 goats. So trading the goat for the Iceveil Archer, no problem. I would let the Solari Shield Bearer damage go through. 17 HP doesn't matter. I would actually use the Culling Strike on the warrior. Then my opponent could respond with a Hush on his warrior. Then at that point, I can use another Flash Freeze to kill it. So spending 2 Flash Freezes to kill a warrior that he used Hush on, so that's a 6 mana for an 8 mana trade, is better than what actually happened here, where he used 2 Flash Freezes to kill a 2 mana unit, which is a 2 mana plus 3 mana from Hush, which is a 6 mana for a 5 mana trade. So very inefficient trade for Eidolon here. So, but let's accept already that it happened. If you create a misplay, just accept that it happened and then try to move on, try to play better in the next phase. So, he goes for the attack here on the Ashe. And his opponent can't block because he was able to level up the Ashe. It's great for him. He inflicts 12 damage to the opponent. Let's see what the opponent does. Hey, so his opponent summons Shyvana, and once again, he's looking at his hand. If it were me, I would simply use the Culling Strike on the warrior now, because the only way that opponent can respond is to Sharp Sight, but that won't be enough to save the warrior. But Eidolon here probably didn't ask himself what the opponent can respond with. He cast a Culling Strike on the Shyvana, and his opponent ends up using Sharp Sight, so he had to use another Flash Freeze. So that's another example of a resource that has been wasted, because imagine you just use the Culling Strike on the warrior. The warrior dies. Your opponent has no response. Shyvana attacks next turn. So what? Doesn't matter. Just stack the damage. Just stack the damage next turn. Or if you really want, you can freeze, but you just stack the damage at that point. You can get a lot of free freezes on your turn, so there's no need to hurry up. Okay, so we will see the consequences of what happens during the next turn. So his opponent goes for the attack from the warrior to the Ashe, and now he's forced to use 3 sisters in order to stop this from happening. He freezes down the warrior, and if his opponent has Hush, Ashe would be dead. If his opponent Ashe hushes the warrior. But luckily, no response from opponent. He ends up winning here. Just because he is extremely favored in the matchup already, but I think the Shyvana Asol could easily have won this game if he had the right cards to respond. Another example of winning the game, but not necessarily making the correct plays. Okay, the third example that we will look at is one of my games from when I was playing Spooky Asol against Thresh Nasus. Spooky Asol is actually one of my favorite decks right now. If you're looking for a deck to counter Azir, Irelia, or Nasus Thresh, check out my video on Spooky Asol. It's pretty good. So this matchup, we will see an example of me conserving my resources because I didn't need to do it at that time, and I could possibly get more value of it later on. So in the early game, I just kept passing and not taking any trades here because I have a Thresh in hand. I want my units to die when I have a Thresh on board. If I trade now, it could possibly slow down my Thresh level up. And I think the opponent is also doing the same thing. He's also not trading units because he has a Thresh in hand. So turn 5 comes, he summons his Thresh. He summons his Thresh, and then I summon my own Thresh. So at this point, opponent doesn't want to trade units yet because he doesn't want my Thresh to level up and then I get to attack on my turn and then I summon the Asol. So it's going to be a game of cat and mouse where I wouldn't want to level up the Thresh when he's threatening to attack next turn. And same situation for him. He wouldn't want to level up my Thresh when I'm going to attack on the next turn. So that's why here I just go ahead and pass because I had no way of leveling up my own Thresh. I don't want to kill his units unnecessarily, progressing the level up of his Thresh, and then he will attack next turn. So I just pass here. He goes ahead and summons a Nasus. And now this is the point. One of the questions that I asking myself is, do I need to Withering Wail and box here? Because there's an opportunity here for 9 mana. I could Withering Wail. I would be able to kill the Fading Icon and the Spirit Leech, and Nasus would be down to 3 HP, very vulnerable to the box. So I get 3 kills there. But there are disadvantages to that. One, because do I need to do this now? Do I need to do this now? The answer is no. Why? Withering Wail will still get the same value whether I do it now or next turn. I get to kill these 2 units. Doesn't matter, this turn or next turn, I get to kill it. But if I do it this turn, I will progress his Thresh's level up on my attack turn. Possibly he would level up his Thresh on his attack turn and then attack me with another Nasus. So I don't want that to happen. So I don't need to do this now. Second is if you look at my hand, I have 2 Hushes. I am not in a rush at all to kill the Nasus. I don't need to go proactively for a Withering Wail into box here because I have the answers for the Nasus. And I would get the same or even more value out of Withering Wail if I use it later on. So what I ended up doing here is just using Star Shaping. I can afford the tempo loss here because the board is pretty even at this point. So the next turns, he tries to get kills. He's trying to get his own kill. So imagine if I already used Withering Wail, he would trigger some more kills, level up the Thresh, and possibly attack with the Nasus. So here, he already attacked, so I'm not afraid to spend my Withering Wail here because he has no more threat of attacking with a level up Thresh. He already spent his attack turn. And during my attack turn, I still had no way actually of leveling up my own Thresh here. So I just passed. I waited for him to attack. He summoned a Dune Keeper. And now I can go ahead and use Withering Wail because I can level up my Thresh before I attack, which is super good news for me. So that's what ends up happening. Both of our Threshes level up, but I get to attack first, so I get to put out the Asol first. So here he goes for a Siphoning Strike just to increase the stat of his champs. I went for the preemptive Hush in order to kill the Nasus immediately because I drew another Hush. At this point, I have 3 Hushes in hand. This is the point earlier. I did not need to use the box. I asked myself, do I need to do this now? Do I need to use box? And the answer is no, because I had double Hush in hand. I had triple Hush now, so I just spent the first Hush to kill the first Nasus. Then his Thresh is leveled up, but it didn't really matter. He was able to summon the second Nasus. I was able to Hush it down again. And that's all she wrote. Okay, so that's a classic example of me playing correctly. So that's it for the first episode. I hope that you learned a lot from this one. This is just the first episode, so if you have any suggestions on how to make this series better, just let me know in the comment section below. If you have any suggestions for future topics that you want me to cover, do put it in the comment section below as well. I'm trying to improve my content with each video. I'm not only trying to improve my Legends of Runeterra skills, I'm also trying to improve my skills in content creation for you guys. As always, if you like this video, leave a like, leave a random or a non-random comment for the YouTube algorithm, because comments will really help my video to be recommended to other users so that I will grow more as a channel. If you're not yet subscribed, make sure that you're subscribed. I hope that you're having a nice day. I hope that you're still having fun playing Legends of Runeterra. Bye-bye.